is happening, fellow fantasy GMs? I am JJ Wang. He is the bearded one, DJ Dub. And with our powers combined, we are the Fantasy Couriers.
Okay, we are in the midst of the NFL playoffs. We were recording this prior to conference championship game. It's been all chalk and one team playing with house money. What are you more surprised with thus far in the playoffs? The fact that the Commanders are in the conference championship or that it's chalk? Because that doesn't happen too often.
I'm thinking I'm more surprised with the Commanders being in there because we all figured Buffalo and Kansas City would probably be that team. Well, not everybody, but majority of people. And then the Eagles were competing for the best team in the East, or the NFC all year. So it's not really too much of a surprise that those guys are really here. But the Commanders, that's a huge surprise.
Yeah, I had a fantasy football recap into the year party for my league where my team just crapped the bed totally. It's one of the fun it's a fun league I do over Memorial Day. It's with Pastor Jacques who's been on with us. Actually, one guy's gonna be on with us next week. Won our charity league, and Eric from last year probably will jump on at some point. He won the league for the third time in a row, and in that league you get championship rings. So this dude has three ginormous championship rings, a trophy, and the guy that lost has to wear a cup around his neck as a necklace. So it's a gold
Oh,
cup
nice.
that he's got to wear. He wears it actually into a store and has to buy a bottle of the winner's favorite top shelf liquor, which I thought's kind of funny. Some dude's going to go to Giant and buy me a lot of Dr. Peppers, all I could figure out at this rate, unless I want to have something nice on a shelf to look fancy and sophisticated. Is
I'd
all
go. I'd go with the Dr Pepper.
Yeah, I am as well. But you know what? We're not a fantasy playoffs podcast. You know what's interesting is I used to do a fantasy playoffs game, but all the programs have went away from it. Pretty much, it's like DraftKings and all the betting sites have got it. NFL used to have a great one where you would compound multipliers for the week. I think you did it 1 or 2 years with me, and
Yeah, I'm
gets
not
me
a fan.
interested. But
Really wasn't a fan. I'm not too much of a fan of like the daily fantasy either. So I feel like it's not the same. But I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Yeah, after the regular season, I just kind of don't want to play fantasy anymore.
For me, it keeps me interested because my team has not really won a playoff game in a very. We don't have time for the long time away, and but yeah, it's I may be with you on the surprise there of so what I was talking about is we were talking about I was at that league and one of the guys is a diehard Commanders fan. He had like a Sean Taylor jersey. We had a Chiefs fan there, a Bills fan there, and an Eagles fan league. So it was quite a quandary. And the guys across the way were hanging out with Eagles and Commanders gear. So it was just a beautiful disaster of what's going on and just hearing everybody just be excited for what's and I'm gotta admit I was jealous. Like I hope one day to be able to do that more so than just I like winning my fantasy champions, but I want my team to be good one year. Like you in our youth, you got to enjoy when you were a Cowboys fan. You got to enjoy seeing all those teams. In my known lifetime, my Dolphins went to the Super Bowl when we were four. I think it was something like that. So it's been a putrid life. So anyway, let's get into what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the greatest position in professional sports, the most I mean, it's such a great position that the league has a day that honors this position. I mean, National Tight Ends Day, nothing is greater than that. There's tight end university. It's just such a stellar position that gets so few points for the NFL in fantasy football. But I don't know why. I'd be curious. I'd love to go back in time and just look at myself and see when I fell in love with the tight end. I think it's Antonio Gates, to be honest. Like I loved me some Antonio Gates, watching some Tony Gonzalez. There's never been tons of great tight ends, but I just love a good tight end because he's a dude that has to block. He's a dude that has to catch, and tight ends have become more athletic than basically being glorified linemen early in our lifetime. Or the Shannon
Yeah,
Sharp fan. Shannon Sharp. Oh yeah.
the only tight ends I ever liked were Jay Novacek and Jason Witten.
I knew that's
So
coming. Shannon Sharp. I love some Shannon Sharp too. I
I like.
forgot.
I
Uh,
like Shannon Sharp. Shannon Sharp was okay, but I mean, yeah, like I said, I just never really been a big tight end guy. But I love me some Jay Novacek and some Jason Witten.
and this was a interesting year for the tight ends. I think as I was looking to prepare for this, it was that we knew they weren't great, but I don't think they were as terrible as we think they were. You had a solid, I'd say, top 10 guys. And then after that, there was some dart throws, which is, I think the last couple of years, it's been like a solid type 6 or 7. So we're bouncing up a little bit. And some of the guys, you're looking at some of the guys that are in the 11 to 20 range are guys that would have had more, but they might have gotten injured. So injuries, if we didn't have some of the injuries, we could have had finally a tight end one for every team in the league. So I think hopefully that's something I would love to see that come in and give tight ends more of an impact that we don't need tight end premium leagues, but they're just tight ends that can play.
Yeah, I think there was about a solid top five, and then the rest of them were, eh.
Well, Kelsey was 6. That's the interesting thing.
Yeah, that's where the starts.
Because there's some after 6 that we'll highlight here in a moment. So we'll work through. I'll hit some of the ones, and when we get done, I'll hit some of these guys that are in the 12 to 20 range to see what you think as far as what their future will hold. So we're gonna hit a couple busts, which in JJ Wang's world that means everybody. And in my world,
after that solid top five.
in my world, it means Kyle Pitts. So we'll start there. We got 3 busts, 3 surprises, and MVP, and then we'll hit some just tight end thing. But is Kyle Pitts not the epitome of football bust? But he's going to play forever. He had one stud week. That would be week number 8 there, and then the rest of the weeks were just putrid. A couple of 10s, but he ended tight end 15 on a team that had Drake London and a bunch of jobbers, and the jobbers were getting more catches than him. Bijan went bonkers. We talked about Kirk Cousins the other week, who, as bad as he was, still put up some yards, but somehow Kyle Pitts couldn't catch him. And you watch him play, he looks like he has no clue what's going on. Like, is he so bad now that we can't even do you think that finally next year we can't say he's a bust because people will finally not draft him in single digits?
I think so, but he's definitely a bust so far. I think people are probably pretty much over as far as drafting him high, but I do feel like tight end is one of those positions where you can have like a late surge at the end of your career. I mean, he's still a super young guy. Tight ends can play until their mid 30s at this, the way some of these guys are going. But yeah, so far bust. I think people are probably done with him, not going to draft him. But I think there's a chance in the future that he's just going to randomly pop up.
Oh, that would be intriguing. There's a name that I'm going to pop up in a bit that we will see if he could be similar to that fella. So yeah, so the bust was this year. Like I don't even want to waste time going over Kyle Pitts. I think we give him too much. He's gotten too much.
Terrible.
What?
Terrible.
So the second one, this guy actually, believe it or not, in a half point finished as a tight end 7. But if you drafted Sam Laporta, I think you were pretty much disappointed because you said past your top 5. He was tight end 7, but he was expected to be tight end 1, 2, 3, like right up there fighting for the top tight end, who we're going to talk about in our surprises. But all in all, Sam Laporta really, he had one game over 100 yards and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 touchdowns, 2 of them in one game, which was 3 for 6 for 2 touchdowns. So it was still pretty putrid year for Sam Laporta when the expectations were through the roof.
Yeah, it's not good. Looking at his weeks, he did have a very good start of the season up until week 9. He was finishing. It was either boom or bust. I had a couple top 12 finishes, top 10 finishes. And then from week 10 on, he kind of looked more familiar, like that guy that you wanted. I mean, tight end 3, 2, 5, 5. There was a tight end 24 in there. But other than that, he played way better. But you were expecting more to tight end 1 numbers. You really wasn't expecting the way he started the season. So in the grand scheme of things, I think you could consider Sam Porta a bust, but definitely not giving up on him going into next year.
Oh no! Would you still have? So if we're looking here, we're looking at probably, as my computer's crashing. 1, 2. Would Sam Laporta? Could there be an argument for him to be drafted as a top 5 tight end, or is he?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think Sam Laporta could easily finish, you know, have a season the way he finished this season. I don't think it would be that much difference. But just if you look at the numbers in the beginning of the season, he wasn't getting the targets. I mean, he went through a stretch of games where he had 3, 2, 4, 1, 2, and then missed a game when he had a game with 6, and then his next game was 3. Then after that, everything was above. Everything was 6 and above. So there toward the end of the season, they started using him more like we thought they were going to use him, in the beginning of the season. And I think, especially with the change in offense coming, so I think he might even have the possibility to be a bigger threat depending on what kind of offense they decide to go with. But yeah, I still think he'd still be worthy of top 5, top 3 maybe.
Yeah, I think we've got a top three. Then after that is sort of iffy for me. Like five or a little bit later is my number because I'm Jameson Williams resurgence. Like he's a guy I'm probably gonna be ranting and raving about all off season because he just went bonkers this year, and I'm almost on the wagon again for him. I'm gonna bet on him next year and see how many more gambling puns I can do in the next couple of months. But he's close to being maybe a my guy, and that's my worry for Laporta. He used to be my worry. He's my worry why I traded away a couple shares of St. Brown, which was stupid. But his coming into the league basically this year is what I think hurt Laporta the most. And Gibbs had a ton of catches. So there's just so many mouths, and we'll see. I think you're totally right. Is the new OC gonna focus more? I mean, they ran a lot, but they moved a lot, so they passed a lot too. So what's he gonna want down the field stuff, possession stuff? It's Sam Laporta could be a wild card that you gotta gamble and pray for, or see what happens.
Yep.
The next guy was one of our preseason favorites. I hate to use him, but injuries did hurt him. But being on a terrible team hurt him. He was getting targets, but the targets weren't amounting to diddly squat except for one game, and that was Evan Ingram. He had 10 targets twice this year. One game he had 10 targets, which was 5 catches for 45 yards. That's greatly terrible. 10 for 10 for 102 is spectacular against the Bears, but otherwise he had no other games. He had no game over 45 yards except for that 102-yard game, and he was just hurt all the time. And Evan Ingram's 30 years old, so there's going to be changes in Jacksonville. And without looking at his contract, I would assume they're going to try to get someone in there, a younger tight end that's not hurt after he had the breakout season more or less last year. His rookie season and last year have been his 2 best seasons, and this year he just couldn't stay on the field. And when he was on the field, Jacksonville was inept. So was it his fault, their fault? Do you think there's a bounce back? Could he be a top 10 tight end? What are your Evan Ingram? I know you love him. So what are we doing?
I'm probably not viewing him as a top 10 tight end. I think I was expecting more out of Trevor Lawrence. But I think the biggest thing that hurt him was the emergence of Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, he turned into be that number one guy. You're looking at the last 2 years as far as targets go with Jacksonville. He had 98 targets and 143 targets. That was tight end 2 and then tight end 5. And then this year he only had 64 targets for a paltry 360. That's dreadful. 5.7 yards a catch. So I think that the emergence of Brian Thomas hurt him. Injuries, definitely, that was probably the biggest thing. He missed half the season. So, I mean, there's a lot of targets there. But overall, yeah, I think they probably move on. There's going to be new coaches. Brian Thomas is the guy. I think that hurt a lot. So I don't really see a reemergence of Evan Ingram. I think bought into him when I probably shouldn't, and I paid for it. So.
I paid for it because I drafted him a lot after you got me convinced to get him, and that kicked me in the butt.
Yeah, that was bad.
But the thing for me is, if he'd have played the whole season, what would he have had if he's getting 10 targets and catching 40 yards a game? Like that's why I wasn't going to put him on there, because I hate to put a bust as an injured guy because that's too easy. I want it to be a guy that was there. Like Kyle Pitts was there the entire season, and he was terribly.
Even when he played, he was terrible.
Yeah, so that one game was great. I played him that week, but enough of the crappy tight ends. Let's talk about the stud of all studs, the rookie reception record. I think we've already mentioned that we were wrong on how stinking good this monster is going to be, and that is Brock Alan Bowers of the Las Vegas Raiders set a rookie reception record with 112 receptions, 1,194 yards, and 5 touchdowns, which, I mean, that's probably almost all the touchdowns the Raiders scored because they were awful on a terrible team. Is Brock Bowers tight end 1 next year, or is Brock Bowers Sam Laporta next year, or somewhere in between?
I think it's probably tight end 1. The difference between Sam Laporta and Brock Bowers is Sam Laporta has just got more competition. So I know things are changing with the Raiders. They got new coaching. The players,
Pete Carroll, right?
Yeah, Pete Carroll. The players are definitely not as good as Detroit. The receivers, there's nobody to compete with. There's nobody at running back to compete to steal some those out of the backfield type catches. So I think until the Raiders start bringing in some better players, I think this doesn't change. I mean, he's still going to be the target guy, and you just need targets, man.
Pete Carroll's older than my parents.
Yeah, he's an old guy. Oldest
He'll turn 74 in the season.
Oldest coach in the NFL.
And he was that a couple years ago, which is crazy to think. I mean, it's going to be like a lot. There's a lot of things where possibly Sanders could be there. So he is like, I think he'll be drafted tight end 1. I don't think he's going to be tight end 1. I have a feeling after that drop to lose the game that Mark Andrews is going to be on a mission and either be tight end 75 or tight end 1 by a mile. I think that's going to be something intentionally in his offseason training, his offseason programming, and Trey McBride's there. So I think there's
maybe, but I think the emergence of Isaiah Likely in that offense is just going to continue to take away.
He emerged, but then he submerged too. He went to crap.
Yeah, you're right. But I mean, he's still competing. Mark Andrews is still the guy.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's competing with Mark Andrews. But I think when he flashes, I mean, he looks like a good athletic tight end. And if he was getting all the run, I think a big season would be in store. But like there's still, I think it's still like a 50-50 tight end distribution there at some point.
Yeah, like I think Trey McBride, to me, he could be the biggest argument there to take it back. I think there's going to be, obviously he's not going to get these numbers next year. Like I don't believe that, but nobody sets like records and then gets them again. It could, but I think there'll be a drop because of the next year's going to be a rookie quarterback. So we'll see who it is with them as they go. But the next guy I have is more of a surprise because he wasn't even drafted really to be I don't think he was really drafted to be the number 1 tight end on his team. Right now I just brain farted on the other guy. They drafted 2 tight ends. One was Tucker Kraft. Who's the other tight end? Luke Musgrave wasn't he supposed to be the guy that was, and then he got hurt and Tucker Kraft sort of took over. And Tucker Kraft didn't. I mean, we're not talking top 5 gangbusters. I mean, Tucker Kraft ended up at half point PPR on Fantasy Pros here. He was the tight end 9. He had a decent year, but I'm looking at him as like bang for your buck, 707 yards, 50 receptions, and 7 touchdowns in a tight end landscape. He helped carry one of my teams that had Evan Ingram, kept me floating above water that I was competing. Whereas if I went from Evan Ingram down to like Dalton Schultz or Chigakonkwo, I'd have been toast.
Yeah.
So I think Tucker Kraft jumped out there. That was a surprise because we thought Musgraves would get some more. But we thought the receivers also would be just gangbusters when none of them really took off, and Green Bay's offense was just Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, I mean he was better than I thought. If you was playing him at the end of the season, he really hurt you if he was your starting tight end. But there in the middle of the season, he had a good stretch, and I just with the 7 touchdowns, you can see him being 6'5" and all the other threats. He's that big end zone target that I think that it could probably to win you some weeks off of fantasy, and he's a pretty good receiver. So I mean, it's not like he's competing with a whole lot of options on the outside. So he could definitely be the number 2 guy, especially with touchdown upside. So yeah, I was surprised where he could finish. I think he could probably make another. I think there's still another step he could take. So I think he could be flirting with that, that top 5 potential type right there on the outside looking in. But yeah, I mean, surprising. I liked him. I think as long as he can keep Musgraves out of the picture, I think it's the spot's his. I think he stands a pretty good shot.
Yeah, I'm a Kraft family. I think I think the Packers, much like the Texans, will have that their quarterbacks. This was that year where they just got punched in the gut because I think they might have got too comfortable, and I could see those two franchises receiving games pick up next year. Those are guys you could probably get on the cheap just to keep an eye for as you're planning for next season. Keeping in the theme with the Manders, uh, when you're 34 years old playing football and your name's not um, Tony Gonzalez, your name's not Antonio Gates, you've been sort of cast away to a point for a couple years. That's Zach Ertz. He hasn't gotten over 575 yards since 2021. And I mean, he was a stud in Philly. He was alive in Arizona a little bit. Like he had his first Arizona year at 574, but he's never really scored a ton of touchdowns. And this year, he was he had a decent year, especially sort of more from the second half of the year. He picked it up as the Manders picked it up to end as the tight end eight. So if you were patient and either got him halfway through off waivers or patient, you didn't get gangbuster yards, but you also avoided that 1 for 5 week and I mean, there was a 1 for 12 week along the way. It wasn't, I mean, it's tight end. So you're not expecting every week's not going to be 100 yards and 7 receptions, but he was a surprised considering we did not think we didn't think the Manders would be this good, and we thought there might be a little more Ben Sinnott as well, and that dude didn't show up. So I would say it's surprising that Zach Ertz at 34 had the decent number 8 tight end year.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I got him on a dynasty team. So I mean, look, he was clearly on Washington's number 2 receiver. He had the 7 touchdowns, 91 targets, so that's really, really good. Like I said, he wasn't fantastic. I mean, he didn't have like spectacular games, but I mean, he was good. I mean, there was weeks where he helped you. I mean, there's some weeks where he didn't help you at all. But he's just like that, like tight end guy. Hey, he's the best of the rest. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much how I see it. At 34 years old, I don't know how much longer he can go. Ben Sinnott, set this year, so maybe he starts integrating more next year. We'll see. But like I said, 34. I mean, he's not going to be playing that much longer. So I think this was probably his last good year, probably. But yeah, definitely a surprise. Finished as a top 10 tight end. Didn't really expect that one. So you got him super late, and at least you got some return out of him.
Yeah, and the thing is, and that's the strategy you got to think of when you're drafting tight ends. You are either going to bid high or look for that guy that's going to float across the season and be like, dude, my goal for the week is 30, 40 yards, and then I'll get a bonus touchdown, a quarter of the time. That's sort of the way you gotta gamble with tight ends. It's just a team creation. So there's 6 surprises, 6 duds, and now the moment of importance, the fantasy MVPs. I gotta say, I am super excited.
So I will say, I mean, I know it's tight ends, but I feel like there is literally only one option here.
I know who you're taking, the big guy, right?
I'm taking the same guy you're taking.
Oh, you are? I thought you might
Yeah.
throw in a little because other than that, before we take our guy, we're going to talk about him because we haven't shared each other our MVPs before the show. The one guy that I wanted to think about for MVP because we thought he might be for dead because we love him because he's a fellow wrestling fan, and that was George Kittle, who had been, sort of injured and down, but ended up tight end too, only down by 9 points from Brock Bowers. I don't think we thought he would have that good of a season to average basically 13.2 and a half point PPR. So argument could be made for George Kittle as a rebound year. I didn't want to mention him too early because I didn't want to spoil you, but he came up as number 2. But our fantasy MVP is the number 4 tight end on the year. You got him off the waiver wire, unless you were me in a league, and then you dropped him and then picked him back up. Thank God. That's the man, the legend, the newest member of the Dolphins tight end receiving record with 74 receptions and 802 yards, never done by a Dolphins tight end in the history of their team, and that is Jonnu Smith at age 29. Decided to do play football like we thought he was about almost a decade since 2017. We thought this big giant guy would come through. I mean, last year he showed signs of life, but for what you got, you can't ask for more from a tight end than 88 receptions, 884 yards, and 8 touchdowns. And he became Tua's Tyreek Hill almost this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So go back to George Kittle. I think the argument can be made, but then again, George Kittle is still drafted as a top 5 tight end.
Yeah.
So I mean, even though we think he wasn't going to be as good, he was still drafted, to be that guy. So I think that's the really only difference. Johnny Smith, it took him half the season to kick in. But once he did, I mean, he was like the guy pretty much the rest of the rest of the
October
season.
20th.
Yes. So I mean, like I said, he finished 4, and then the previous 8 years were outside the top 15. So I can kind of see this maybe possibly being a one-hit wonder. So just be careful. But I mean, the way that offense is, I mean, it wouldn't be surprising me if Johnny Smith did this again next year.
Yeah, I think Johnny Smith has one more year in it at least with his age and the contract, and just unless they totally decide to go back, if they go back to what they were doing last year on offense, where they were this year they were scared to go over the safeties and try the long ball. So if Tyreek comes back and they get brazen again, Johnny Smith's doomed. If Tyreek's gone, like out in my dream world, Tyreek says, "Okay, peace." They say peace to you. They sign T Higgins, and they roll with that. That would be amazing. But that would benefit Jonnu Smith. So it really comes down to what they're going to play next year. But Jonnu Smith, man, that dude saved some teams, kept one of my teams from having to wear the coveted gold cup that I mentioned earlier. Thank God for Jonnu Smith saving my butt there. But I think anybody who picked him up, you probably got him off waivers because nobody expected this. I jokingly, I think I said preseason he might have been one of my sleepers or something, but I was like, hey, I think he might have been in my fantasy pro sleeper thing where I just pick 4 guys, just because it's a tight end. You just guess what? I was like, I'll pick my team. But so where do you? 2 questions with Jonnu Smith as we close out the show. Where do you think Jonnu Smith should / would, you can answer both, be drafted as far as tight end rankings next year, and where do you think he finishes in a not perfect, not terrible world? So if it goes about average, where do you think he will or should be drafted, and where do you think he finishes next year?
I mean, being only 29, I think being that I think he's got another year, possibly 2. I think he can be drafted. Another tight end 8,
That was
9,
my number.
10, right around that. Because like I said, after top 7, you know, that's when after the top 7, that's when you start talking about people like Tucker Craft. And then after Tucker Craft, there's really not really a whole lot of really interesting guys after that. So I think Jonnu Smith can definitely be around that 8, 9, 10, and I think that's where he could finish. He could easily finish as like the 8, 9, 10 tight end. I don't see doing it again this year. What it did next year, next year what he did this year, but it doesn't take a whole lot. So I think top 5 to 10. I think he can do that.
Where he is, he finished top 4. If he goes in and gets drafted about 7, that's right after Laporta would be. That puts him ahead of like Ertz, Kraft, Fryermuth, Njoku.
Yeah.
Which of these guys makes it? That's my last thing I want to say here is the guys between 10 and 20. There's a handful at 10 and 25, to be honest, handful of guys who gave some showing, but then injuries or just some bad luck sent them to the side there. We're looking at David Njoku. He had some great weeks this year, but kept getting hurt. Any chance David Njoku jumps into that top 10? He's right at 11, so it's close.
I think Matt possibly if he stays healthy all season, I think there's the possibility. But when you're missing 7 or 8 games every year, of course it's really, really hard. So I think if he plays, barring injury, I think he could be a top 10 guy.
K. Dotton, top 10 guy, yes or no? Because he did better when I think Godwin was around and there was less, which was interesting.
I don't think K. Dotton could be a top 10 guy. I think he'd probably be outside the top 10.
Here's a guy I think could, in my opinion. I'll see what you think, because of the way he's going and the way the team will probably be structured. Mike Gesicki came on strong, good middle, then came on strong at the end, but I don't think they can retain T. Higgins at the price he's going to go for. So say with T. Higgins and without.
I mean, with T. Higgins, I don't think there's much of an
No,
opportunity.
I'll go with you
Without
there.
T. Higgins, I think there's a chance because that offense is going to throw the ball. I mean, he had some decent games, but last two games were really really good. So yeah, I think without T. Higgins, there's a possibility.
Cole Komet in year 2, but new coaching system.
I think
That's
Cole
the
Kmet.
Detroit coaching system.
That's another guy. I mean, if they bring him back Keenan Allen and they're keeping DJ Moore and they still got room in Doomsday, I think there's a lot of mouths to feed there. We don't expect Caleb Williams to get better. But I don't know if he can be a top 10 guy. I think he's probably outside looking in. I think he's got to get a lot of touchdowns.
2 guys to close it out. My favorite tight end, who's terrible but so athletic and just on a terrible team with the rookie quarterback, probably Chig. Could he flirt with 15? He's at 23. Could he flirt with 15?
I think he can flirt with 15. Doesn't take a whole lot. I mean, a
No.
rookie quarterback. I mean, there's been a few occasions where the tight end is their favorite option, and so yeah. I mean, I think there's a possibility he can flirt with top 10, top 15.
And a guy that I don't know how I missed for our bust. I should have honorable mention bust already. Dalton Kincaid.
Yeah, disappointing. Thought he'd be better than this,
Only
but
missed 4 games.
he's still young enough to where the name is still fresh. I think the offense is still high powered. So yeah, I mean that's still tough. I don't think he could be a top 10 either. But yeah, disappointing.
There is the greatest position in fantasy football, and one day I will have to research and write a research article as to why I love the tight end. I have no clue, but it is what it is. They're my favorite position. They've made me happy over the years, and I will still overdraft them generally.
Yeah, absolutely.
So give us some wisdom, and let's rock and roll.
I got a funny story. So if you don't know, I started refereeing basketball again. I had a couple of middle school games, late last week, and I thought we did a pretty good job. I mean, refereeing middle school is pretty complicated. Um, Being a referee is actually really complicated. I don't think people realize how hard it is. So give me a break. But as I was leaving the gym, there was this little old lady standing right behind me, so she had to see me. I'm standing 6 inches, in front of her. And I'd be darned if the words out of her mouth were, "These referees stink." I was like, all right. So I turned around, gave her a nice big smile, and I said, "Thank you." I said, "Thank you." And I walked away, didn't do much. But man, we just get her. It's crazy how much these referees get harassed. I mean, I'll yell at a referee here and there, but
I like the Chiefs referee.
no, definitely not a Chiefs, definitely not a Chiefs referee. But I just wish people would just understand how hard it is, and if they think they can do it, just one game. That's really that I think that's all it would take for them to change their mind. But these fans just got free reign to yell whatever they want. It's absolutely insane. But yeah, it's still fun though. You gotta block those guys out. So as always, trust yourself and trust the process.